Hello and welcome to the second episode of History Buttons. I guess I'm your host. My name is Aaron. And tonight, because it's late at night, probably around 11 p.m. But tonight, I'm making buttons with this design. This is a coin from the reign of Yaroslav the Wise, Grand Prince of Kyiv and Russ. And I was going to do a separate episode on Vladimir the Great, who was his father, but I just decided to push both of them together. You can see this design here has the kind of more modern form of the trizub than what we saw on the previous episode. The trizub, of course, is that stylistic trident on the seal of Ukraine. This is a very old symbol for them. And really, last time I talked quite a bit about stuff happening kind of outside of the Kyiv Russ. But today I'm going to talk mostly about it. Again, this is like foundational myth stuff. This was all compiled in something called the Primary Chronicles, which traditionally is ascribed to a monk by the name of Nestor. Though there's some dispute as to whether he actually wrote it. He did write other things, but apparently there are certain ways that language is used in the Primary Chronicles that make that cast the actual authorship into question. But regardless of who wrote it, it's kind of not a thing that I worry about, because it is considered the primary source for the deep history of Ukraine from the Kyiv Russ. And I keep saying Ukraine, but one of the things to keep in mind is that there's a shared heritage there. And although we could say that, Ukraine and Belarus and Russia all kind of went their separate ways over time, they all claim Vladimir the Great. They all claim Yaroslav the Wise. They all claim all this because they were nominally under one rule. And first of all, let me say this: they may be called the Great, they may be called the Wise, but they were not what we would consider to be good people. They were murderous, they were backstabbing, they were conniving, they were, honestly, they were nobles and, royalty in the 900s and thousands, and politics was rather brutal. The kinds of growing pains that Russ went through were typical of pretty much every land back then. Vladimir and Yaroslav both had to fight siblings for the right to rule. It was not a clear path for either one of them. It's one of the reasons why I decided to just put them together, because they have very similar stories. There were a lot of there were a lot of things from other kingdoms involved in this. We like to look at history as, the story of this people, the story of that people, but it's all intertwined. Last time I talked about how, in my view, the Rus were not really Nordic. They, had a handful of people, Rurik and his two brothers, who were supposed to be Norse. And there's actually there's a lot of crossover with the Norse Sagas, who talk about people like Yaroslav the Wise, who they called, Yaroslav the Lame or something like that, because he'd taken an arrow to the leg. But he's definitely mentioned there. So I always have a lot of skepticism about the truthfulness of foundational myths, because they're typically written to justify the legitimacy of a particular person or a particular group to rule. And I mean, heck, even in the U.S., we have stories like George Washington and the cherry tree, where he's like, "Oh, I cannot tell. Yes, I chopped down that cherry tree. I cannot tell a lie." Complete fabrication. There were no cherry trees around when George Washington was a kid. The first cherry trees were introduced to North America as a gift from Japan when Washington D.C. was after Washington D.C. had been laid out, and that's stuff that we have like historical records of. We let I think that was written in the 1820s or 1840s. There's like a book of, using George Washington's supposed childhood as, this is what a good boy does. And with this, we're not talking about, now kids, this is how you mind your manners. This is how you are a good citizen or whatever. This is about, yes, we have a right to rule here, and here's why. But a lot of the stuff in there does jive with records in Byzantium and records in the Norse Sagas. So we know that the people, at least, were real. They touched other countries. They touched other kingdoms. And holy heck, Vladimir or Vladimir the Great came to power with the aid of the Norse. But in the Norse were called the Varangians, and he went back. He went back, quote unquote, home and and brought back a Varangian army to push his claim to the throne, which, when you're able to bring in another nation's army, and that's one hell of a claim to the throne. Not sure which throne. I guess whichever throne you want then. But in that case, it was the Swedes. It was always the Swedes. Norway split off from Sweden, and the two of them were at loggerheads at some point in here. But and this was interesting. The Kyiv Kievan Rus at this point. You had Rostov, you had Novgorod, you had Kyiv. These were the three principalities, and the and it was they talk a lot about tribute, which, I mean, that's in Western Europe. You talk about taxes. Oh, they're collecting taxes. They're withholding. This person is withholding taxes, and for whatever reason, the terminology used there is tribute, probably because these areas were actually nominally held by other people, by tribes that still had a tribal identity, and so the tribute would be paid from the labors of those specific tribes, and there's a lot of symbolic difference there. In practical terms, it's taxes. So Vladimir, he was a fierce pagan. His grandmother Oleg, Saint Oleg, now had been baptized and was a big proponent of Christianity. Sviatoslav, the father of Vladimir, was a pagan, and although he didn't see any reason to take sides, he tried to I don't care how you worship, just don't make trouble. And but Vladimir, when he came down with his with the Hungarian army, was very pro-pagan, very anti-Christian, and this led to a massacre of pagans, which later on he decided was maybe a bit much. And I think it was in 988 that said that he sent out emissaries to check out all the different religions around, and they came back and were really impressed by the pageantry of in Constantinople. Like, literally, they said, "God is here," and the ceremonies here are far better than ours. So he converted to Christianity at some point. He was publicly baptized in Constantinople. Some say he was baptized before then, and this is just an official thing, kind of a coming out party. And he built a bunch of churches across Kyiv Rus. He also, before he converted, it said that he had 800 concubines and 9 wives, and he had children with a lot of these women. Yaroslav was made Prince of Rostov, I believe, and then later on was moved to Prince of Novgorod. Kind of a promotion. Vladimir decreed that his heir would be Sviatopolk, and Yaroslav disagreed with this. He was like, no, that should be me. And he withheld tribute. His father was going to march on him to, show him who's boss. But instead he died of old age. And then what happens when you have a king with 800 concubines, 9 wives, and children with a lot of them? You have he had a lot of children, a lot of royal children, a lot of heirs who all thought that they should be king. And not only that, but some of them had, their mothers were from other lands and were the children and were the daughters of rulers of other lands. One of these was Poland. And one of the other sons went against Sviatopolk pretty much right away, and he had the backing of the Polish king, who I want to say is Borislav the First, also called Borislav the Brave, I believe, or Sviatopolk. That's right. Sviatopolk was supported by Borislav. Yaroslav fought against him, and he won. Sviatopolk returned, and Yaroslav beat him again, but it was not a sure thing. Yaroslav was actually kicked out of Kyiv, all the way over to and had to retreat back to Novgorod. The people of Novgorod really rallied around him, and he was able to go from there to defeat Sviatopolk. And because of the loyalty of the people there, he granted them extra freedoms and privileges. And the Principality of Novgorod he remade into the Novgorod Republic, i.e. they didn't have a prince over them after that, at least during his reign. Both he and Sviatopolk killed a bunch of their brothers. Yaroslav the Wise was called the Wise because he did a lot of solidifying of the Kyiv Russ. He kicked out the Poles. He kicked out he promulgated his own set of laws. Ruskaya Pravda, I think that's how you pronounce that, is our first written code that was written specifically by them. Vladimir, his father, had put out a code based on Byzantine law, but this was the first one that was rooted in Slavic tradition, and was he also imprisoned for life another brother of his, Sudislav, I think his name was. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's Sudislav. And another brother came out of his realm, out of his lands, which were, I think, around the Black Sea, far to the east of, he said it was to the east of everything. And he came to rescue this other brother. His name, and I'm an American, and I have never heard these names pronounced, so I'm going to butcher this. Mstislav, Mstislav, Mstislav. It's not a combination of letters that appears naturally at the beginning of a word in English. He actually defeated Yaroslav, and for the rest of Mstislav's life, Kyiv Russ was divided east and west along the Dnieper River. And Mstislav was in the east, and Yaroslav reigned in the west. And this would later on become kind of a theme that they would be split in two with that river as a natural border. Now there's a tribe called the Pechenegs. I think it's pronounced Pecheneg. They were the people who killed Oleg. Yeah. No, sorry. They were the people who killed Sviatoslav. There's a lot of killing, a lot of assassinations, a lot of death. The Pechenegs had been the ones to kill Sviatoslav. It was actually a hired hit by the Byzantine emperor who thought that the Rus were getting too powerful. Unfortunately for Constantinople, as history has shown time and time again, people from this area tend to not be cowed by such things. Yeah, you can create disorder and stuff, and yeah, you can use that to take over sometimes, but man, it just doesn't work that way. Vladimir had been big on, bringing them toward the end of his life, bringing them into Christianity and all this stuff. Yaroslav, however, he did a big thing. There was he defeated the Pechenegs in the south in 1036, and that's the last time they threatened Kyiv. Like, that was it. They just and it wasn't just because they were defeated. I think really it was because they didn't have a reason to fight anymore. They're like, yeah, we're cool with the situation, at least as far as anyone's cool with it. They just didn't. They saw more of a common threat in others. But Yaroslav had a guy by the name of, I want to say, Hilarion of Kyiv, named as the metropolitan bishop, which was a huge thing because it was a further separation of Kyiv Russ from Byzantine control. Up until now, the metropolitan bishops were Greek or Byzantine, and this was kind of we're going to be in charge of our own things here, and that's kind of been a theme of throughout the history of that area, is just asserting a level of independence over and over again, despite what whomever is trying to get control of them wants. And sometimes they go a bit overboard one direction or another in their because fanaticism and stuff is it's an easy draw. Inflame passions, it mobilizes people. There's no doubt about it. Generally, not in a good way. But if anything, all of this just goes to show that if you're ever in a position to be like a king or part of a dynasty, just keep it to one wife. Wear a rubber if you're doing if you're playing around with anybody else, because otherwise you just end up with a huge mess after you die. I mean, there were Vladimir probably had about a dozen kids at least who were killed by either Vladimir and his men or Yaroslav and his men. And there were still others like Mstislav who he didn't manage to kill. And those are the ones that were worth mentioning in the Primary Chronicles. I'm sure there were a lot of others that just kind of disappeared, and I'm no longer part of this. Thank you. Don't mind me. I'm just over here dirt farming now because, or maybe they went up to Sweden or something. But the big thing is that during the reigns of these two, Vladimir and Yaroslav at the end, they laid down the institutions that carried the Kyiv Russ up to its end when it was hit by the Mongols, and there was a lot of give and take and moving around of centers of power and stuff, but they ruled a huge area by the standards of the time. I mean, they were a true empire. And really, until the Mongols came in, they were top dog in Eastern Europe. And yeah, they talk about Byzantine Empire. They talk about Bulgaria. Both of them were big, but those two spent a lot of time fighting each other as well. And so that kind of they kept each other busy, basically. And the Rus just became more and more dominant until, like I said, the Mongols came through and steamrolled, and Kyiv in the area that's now known as Ukraine didn't surrender and got steamrolled by them, and Novgorod and Rostov and the other principalities that existed at that point were like, we're good, you can have it, and they surrendered. And but until that happened, and again, I just want to bring this up. Just want to point out the area that we know now as Ukraine did not surrender. They became the example that the rest of Europe pointed to as like, crap, these Mongols are just horrible. And that's a theme over and over and over again in their history. And gosh darn it, I'm going to tie it into current events. They've been having to deal with Russia invading them since 2014. And that's and they just don't stop. And it's something that has been the case all throughout their whole history. and it's yeah, they can be defeated. Yeah, they can, but then they come roaring right back because they don't stop. And there's a lot to admire in that, and most particularly, you look at the different things throughout their history, and I mean, yeah, they do a bunch of bad stuff. Everybody does a bunch of bad stuff. I mean, there really are no good guys up until maybe the 1800s, maybe, but even then, it's touch and go. By modern sensibilities, you don't really find true enlightenment really until after World War II. You find little pockets here and there. Maybe Iceland, perhaps, but that's just because they're so isolated, nobody really bothered them. And so they were kind of free to do their own thing without being always threatened by everyone else. And it's just that's just one of those things. Again, this is all history that as Americans, a lot of us have never really encountered. And you look at it, I mean, again, these same people, Vladimir, Yaroslav, Sviatoslav, from my first episode, they're all claimed by Ukraine and Russia because they were key to the establishment of both countries, because both of those countries and Belarus were all part of one. And it's more over an interpretation of what they mean. That's why, talk about these history buttons and the icons, and maybe I kind of lost the track on what I was doing here with this symbol. But this is this is an old symbol. This is a symbol that goes back a lot longer than anything that we have in our country. And it's always kind of been there. It's always been a rallying point. It's always been, this is our brand. This is who we are. I suspect, after having gone through this, that this is an adaptation of the Sviatoslav kind of fork kind of thing into a more Christian sign. That the trident being, you have 3 and 1. That's that's kind of the conclusion I've come from. I'm not a scholar, although I do have my academic background is in applied anthropology, so I guess you could say I have some training on that. Of course, all the records as to what went into this coin are pretty much non-existent. I mean, they talk about the introduction of East of Classical. Don't know if that's really, that's not really addressed in any surviving writings how exactly that trident came to be. All there is speculation, but going from the Sviatoslav twin fork to the trident seems to me to be one of those appropriation by Christianity of previous pagan symbols. On the other hand, that Sviatoslav fork was taken from Khazaria, was a Khazarian symbol found on their coins. So, so it was an appropriation of an appropriation, which is kind of how these things evolve. It's how these things change over time. You know, very few symbols we have today come from what we associate them with. And that's pretty much my episode. That's my talk. This has been History Buttons. You can find my History Buttons for sale at unicornpromise.com, which has a variety of collectibles and artwork and crafts.